Hey everyone, and welcome to your 11.0 notes. So what we're doing in this section is actually just reviewing some things that you have already seen, like mean, median, mode, and range, and we're introducing you to a couple new concepts called variance and standard deviation. So to start with, we're going to review our measures of center. Remember that this is a measure that represents the center or a typical value of the data set. So something that represents most of the data because it is representing the center of the data, okay? There are three main measures of center. Our mean is the sum of the data divided by the number of data values. So remember, you're adding all of them together and dividing by how many numbers you have. That in our graphing calculator, we will start seeing as x bar. So it'll look like an x with a little bar over the top of it. We're also going to see our median. So the median is the middle number when the values are written in numerical order. So remember to write them from smallest to largest, and then to mark off on the left and the right until you find the middle. When the data set has an even number of values, remember that the median is the mean of the two middle numbers. So say you have something like this, okay, you're marking them off on each side. We would have to add those two together and divide by 2 in order to find our median. So anytime you have an even number of values, that's going to happen. Then we also have our mode. So our mode is the value or values that occur most often. There may be more than one mode, or no mode at all. So it just depends on if I have anything that repeats and how often it repeats. Hey, when to use specific measures of central tendency. So remember we said that the mean was our average. Okay, our average is affected by outliers. So remember, an outlier is a data value that is much greater or much smaller. So when we are finding the mean, since we are adding all data values together, our mean is influenced by outliers. So if we're trying to avoid that, we might not use the mean, and we might use the median instead that is influenced by outliers. It's not influenced by outliers, which is the middle number. So remember, this is the one where you put them in order, and then you find the middle. And your mode might be something that you use when you're comparing categories. So remember, mode is something that occurs most often. Okay, so we're going to start with an example down here. And we're going to find the measures of central tendency of our list. So that means we're going to be finding the mean, the median, and the mode. Okay, so it doesn't matter to me where you start. So we're just going to go down in order. So mean, I'm adding all of my numbers together. And dividing by the total number of numbers I have. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 8 numbers. So I'm going to add all of those together and divide by 8. So when I add them together, I get 81. 81 divided by 8 is going to give me my mean. That's about 10.125. Okay, we are going to see that in our assignment, it's going to tell us what to round to, so just make sure you're paying attention to that. Most of the time it will say round to the nearest tenth, so that would be 10.1. Okay. For your median, remember we want to put the numbers in order, least to greatest, and then we're going to find the middle. So I have 7 as my smallest number. I tend to mark them out as I go. Then I have 8. I have 2 9s, I have a 10, 11, 12, and 15. Okay, so I'm going to find the middle of these numbers, so I'm going to start marking them off. And I notice that since I have an even number, which we had 8, I'm going to have something in the middle here, so I'm going to add those two together, divide by 2, and I'm going to end up with 9.5 as my median. Okay, and the last measure of central tendency is our mode. Remember, mode is the one that occurs most often. We only have one number that is actually repeated in this data set, so our mode is a 9. The other thing that we need to talk about is our measures of variation. So measures of variation describe the spread or the distribution of a data set. So instead of describing the average or the middle of our data, we're describing how spread apart the data values are. So the one that most of you guys are familiar with is range. Okay, your range is the difference between the greatest value and the least value. Okay, the disadvantages is that it only uses 2 data values, whereas standard deviation and variance, which we're going to talk about in a second, use the entire data set. Okay, so when you're looking at range, you're just looking at 2 values, the least and the greatest. When we're talking about variance, okay, that's going to help us figure out our standard deviation. Our variance is the average of the squares of the differences or distances that each value is from the mean. So notice what we were talking about is the distance a number is away from the mean. So if I'm looking at an entire set of data, I want to know how far away is this number from the mean. How far away is this number from the mean? Okay. What we're doing is actually adding all of those distances together in order to figure out the variance or the spread of the data. Okay, so the bigger the variance, the more spread out the data is. And our standard deviation is a measure of how much a typical value in the data set differs from the mean. So if I picked any value, how far it would be from the mean. That's the typical range. Okay. So here we have, this is our standard deviation formula down here, okay? And I just want to talk a little bit about these. So this is sigma. And some of you may be thinking, well, I thought this was sigma. Okay, they both are sigma, actually. This is the Greek alphabet. So just like the English alphabet, we have an uppercase and a lowercase. So they're both sigma when you say them out loud. Okay, so that's sigma, that represents our standard deviation. Here, remember we said x bar would be our mean. So this is how far any data value, the first data, the second data, the third data, is away from the mean. We're going to square that, and this is the number of terms in our set of data. Okay, so we're going to practice using our formulas to find the measures of variation. So here's the same set of data that we used to find mean, median, and mode. And now we're going to find our range, our variance, and our standard deviation. Okay, so range to start with, remember, is the biggest number minus the smallest number. So 15 and 7 are the numbers that I'm looking at. So when I take 15 minus 7, I get 8 for my range. Okay, the next part is going to take a little bit more work to get to. So we have our variance, our standard deviation, and our giant formulas up top. Okay, remember on the last slide I said that the standard deviation is just the square root of the variance. So the formulas look very similar. One just has a square root and one does not. Okay. So in order to start finding our variance and our standard deviation, what we're going to do is actually list all of our x values first. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to list my x values. I'm going to do it in numeric order. So I have 7, 8, 9, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 15. Again, this is the same thing that we were doing to start with for our median. So if you have that list, you can always copy it down when you're doing your standard deviation. The next thing that we're going to do is find the difference between that x value and our mean. So remember 2 slides ago, we actually found out that our mean was 10.125. That's the exact value, so we're going to use the exact value here in order to figure out each of these numbers. So we're going to take this and we're going to say 7 minus 10.125. Then we're going to do it all the way down, 8 minus 10.125, 9 minus 10.125. Okay, and we're going to type each one of those into our calculator in order to figure out what that value is. So for each of those values, I have negative 3.125, negative 2.125, negative 1.125, and again, because that is the same number, negative 0.125, 0.875, 1.875, and 4.875. At this point, since there are a lot of decimals, I would probably add these to double check that they all come out to 0. So if you add all of those sums together, they should sum to 0. That should tell you whether you're doing it right or wrong. And then we're going to move on to the next step. Okay, so as of right now, we have the part that is inside the parentheses. So notice we need to take each one of those pieces and we need to square it. So that's going to be our next step, is to take our x minus x bar and square them. So we're taking those purple numbers and we're squaring them. And I'm going to go ahead and fill those in right quick, and then I will show you what I got. Okay, so there are all of those numbers squared, and if we look at our formula, now we have all of this, and what we need to do is actually add those together, and then we're going to divide by the number of terms that we have. So I'm going to add all of those together. So when I add all of those numbers together, I end up with 44.875. Remember that you then need to divide that by the number of terms that we have, which is 8. And we get our variance is about 5.609. Okay. To find your standard deviation, you're going to take that variance and you're going to take the square root of it, and we end up with about 2.368. Okay. The great thing is that we can do all of that work in our calculator. So using your graphing calculator, you're going to hit Stat and then Edit. Feel free to pause on this screen. You're going to enter all of your data into List 1. You're going to go to Calc after you hit Stat again. Arrow over to get to 1 var stat. And then you're going to hit Enter 3 times and it will calculate everything for you. So you should see on my screen, I'm going to go ahead and hit Stat. I'm going to hit Enter and Edit. Here's the list that we were just working on. So again, I'm going to hit Stat once I enter that. I'm going to arrow over to where it says Calc. I'm going to hit Enter. Enter 3 times to where it says Calc. And then it will show me all of those values. Okay, remember that that top one is your mean. Here's your standard deviation of about 2.36. And it will also show you your median as well. So for our last examples, let's go ahead and utilize our graphing calculators. Remember that you guys have those on your devices, so if you need help getting that on there, let one of us know. Okay, it says 2 game shows, select 12 contestants each. The ages of the contestants are shown in the tables. So I have show A and show B. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my calculator. I just finished typing in all of my list for show A. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Stat. I'm going to scroll over to Calculate. And then I want it on List 1. And we're going to calculate, and it's going to show me all of my data. So that first one there is 32. So remember that that number is your mean. Then we also have our sigma x. That's our standard deviation. So our standard deviation is about 9.55. So we're going to round that to 9.6 there. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down in my calculator because I noticed that it also gives me my median as well as my minimum and my maximum. So that's going to help me find the other values there. So my median is 32.5 and I see that my maximum is 52 and my minimum is 19. So remember, max minus min is going to give me my range. The only thing that we really have to do on our own is the mode. So remember, mode is what occurs most often, and it looks like in this picture or this first show of contestants, the only thing that is repeated is 35. So my mode is 35. Okay, let's practice one more time with show B. I'll show you some of the buttons again, and then you guys will have your assignment. So if you're in this screen from show A, remember that you can just hit Stat one more time. We are going to edit that list, and if you just repeatedly hit delete, it will get rid of everything that you just typed in for show A so that you can type in show B. Okay, I'm just typing in the last couple of digits here in my list, and then remember I'm going to hit Stat. I'm going to scroll over to Calculate, and then I'm going to hit Enter until it gives me all of the numbers I want. So that first one is my mean. The next one that I see in my list is my sigma x, that's my standard deviation, 5.7. Then I'm going to scroll down, I'm going to find my median, which looks like it's 30. So median is 31. Then I have my range, remember, comes from my max minus my min. So 40 minus 20 gets me that my range is 20. And my mode, again, my mode looks like it is 35.